Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 109 of the CUInsight Experience. This episode is brought to you by our friends at PSCU. We love having them as a sponsor and allowing us to get to do what we do. As the nation's premier payments CUSO, the folks at PSCU proudly support the success of more than 1,500 credit unions. My name is Randy Smith. I'm one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and I'm lucky enough to have conversations with amazing people and bring them to you. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is Jenny Blake. Jenny is an author, career and business strategist, international speaker, podcaster, and she also happens to be the keynote for our next mini-con event, Change. While doing research, I felt like I found a kindred spirit, and that had me excited for a great show. And I just have to tell you, my expectations were exceeded. This was so much fun. We talked about pivoting, which we've all gotten good at over the past year, and it happens to be the name of her book and one of her podcasts as well. I loved our conversation about finding space to think more strategically as a leader, and her ideas around being heart-centered, not only as a credit union, but in our careers as well. Whoops, sorry, Jenny. I know the word career is not one you like to use. Life. How's that? An unscripted part of this episode towards the end, we had this amazing conversation about letting things go in business to focus on what we really want to put our energy into. Really good stuff there. It was a lot of fun. Just a awesome episode. I cannot wait to connect with Jenny again. As always, we wrap this all up with some rapid fire question. Who is the person who came to mind when Jenny hears the word success? Or was there a person, since it's a word that she's actively tried to remove from her vocabulary? Jenny added a ton of books to my reading list and took me down memory lane with one of my favorite albums as well. There will be just a ton in the show notes that you're going to want to check out. I hope you enjoy listening in as much as I enjoyed having this conversation. So, without further ado, I give you my conversation with Jenny Blake. Enjoy. Jenny, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Randy. I'm honored to be here.
Oh, well, I am so excited to talk to you today. I do want to give a little warning to our listeners about this episode, because doing research for this conversation, I listened to both of your podcasts and I wrote them down. You have Pivot and the new one, Free Time. And I also ordered your book, Pivot, which should be, it's actually will be arriving at my house today. But as we were talking before, I'm not there. So I will make sure to read it before MiniCon. And that's where you're going to be the keynote. But the reason I wanted to give a heads up is I know I'm going to be asking you a ton of those scratch my own itch question. I am so geeked to have you here today, and I couldn't be more excited. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. It's really such a treat to have somebody dig in so deeply, and I'm every bit as excited to be here today and to be participating in MiniCon coming up. And I just really appreciate it, Randy. And I think the best podcasts are where the host does the scratch your own itch questions. It just
right?
gets so much more interesting. Yeah.
I think that's something the listeners know, is sometimes I will go down rabbit holes. But anyway, so this should be a ton of fun. I'd like to jump in with a big question. And I know, I mean, it's pretty amazing. This has had to worked out well for you, but everyone had to pivot last year. You already had a book by that name and a podcast, pre-COVID, pre-everything. So, pre-pandemic. Something that I guess I was really struggling with earlier in the year, and I'd like to think I'm moving forward on this a little bit more as time goes on, but we all had to pivot fast and quick to adapt to last year. And for somebody like myself who does like change, it was kind of exciting. But that idea of, looking at like what we were doing, what we should be doing, where we need to go, what worked for last year that maybe, doesn't work or isn't necessary going forward. Do you have any hacks, I guess, that, for people to move out of that kind of scarcity mindset? And I was just thinking about it, like, is there anything that you would change? Like I said, I haven't read the book yet and I can't wait to, but like, just from that year, that experience that we all shared last year, if you were updating the book, let's just say.
Yeah, well, I started working on Pivot in 2013, if you can believe it. And it came out in 2016. One of my mantras while writing it was, if change is the only constant, let's get better at it. So when you put that through the lens of 2020, it's like, haha, universe. Okay, we all just experienced a day to day. As you said, we were all pivoting and on a daily basis, both in our personal lives and also in a business context. So I know that so many people listening to this are leading credit unions and operating, they're operators and managers. And there were so many variables and so many things that were shifting day to day and unpredictable from day to day. So I think we all got a black belt in pivoting last year. Even if you haven't read the book and you don't know there's a 4-stage pivot method that I describe. Even for myself, I mean, part of the reason that I set out to write that book was that I didn't feel very resilient to change. And I wanted to get better at it. And I think, again, we were all forced to it. What was so interesting about this last year is that it was a global pandemic, and that everyone around the world was asked to hit pause, rethink, reimagine, recalibrate, reflect. And one of my mantras that I adopted as a small business owner myself was radical reimagining. Everything is up for grabs. And I just found that over and over and over, whatever stone I left unturned in my life and my business, that I didn't stop and radically reimagine. Like, what would happen if I got rid of this thing altogether, or this area, or I completely gave myself permission to do things differently than I ever have? It's just it's like as if we all got a big snow globe shakeup. And for me, I think for so many of us, those little snow particles are still landing. We're still examining what do we really want individually, and even as in our businesses and in our companies and our organizations for the way forward. Because I think we can also say that so much of how we were working wasn't working and may not be the way that we move forward.
I've heard so many people, and I think you hit on such an amazing point there. It wasn't just work, though, right? Like, whether you're the CEO of a credit union or yourself or myself as small business owners, sure, we were having these major pivots professionally, but also personally, right?
Absolutely.
And I've heard a lot of people talk about maybe not wanting to go back to. So when they shook up their snow globe, they're like, wait a minute. That's not the life I want to lead once we're on the other side of this thing. So it's an interesting. I see everybody should pick up your book to learn how
well, thank you. I also think it's a case where change chooses you. And this might be cheesy, but I'm an Oprah fan, and Oprah has this mantra. She just had a podcast episode called Whispers, and she says, "Your life is always speaking to you. Are you listening?" And I just feel like in this last year, all of us, it was almost custom tailored. And custom tailored in a way that is unexpected as well. I kind of, professionally speaking, I was going into 2020 and I said, all right, the book has been out 4 years. I'm going to make 2020 is going to be the tipping point for pivot. This is going to be its best year ever. I could never have predicted that a global pandemic would hit. All my speaking gigs would get wiped out in the same week. My biggest contracts would fall apart. And yet the word of the year ends up being pivot practically, right. And it was just, so it's like still the intentions that we set and the vision is steady. The vision is there for our lives and our work. But I think sometimes we get handed the lesson in almost a photo negative, like a reverse of what we think it's going to be. And for me, it's that Oprah line of, your life is always speaking to you. Are you listening? I don't know about you, Randy, but I feel like in this last year, you couldn't just put the earmuffs on and like pretend not to hear what your life was saying to you. At least I couldn't. I just keep getting messages and the changes keep coming. I don't think that they're quite through yet.
It's such a great point. I think this ties into my next question that I actually had for you. And that's this idea of, I'm going to go to your Oprah line, like, are we listening? But it's that idea of like how much bandwidth, we have. And if we feel like we're putting out fires, right? Like if the world is constantly throwing at us stuff in this immediate time, I'm a huge fan of space. I need space to think. It's something that I strive for. And, just from the research, I get the feeling that you like to think as well. And it really sounds like that's what you were saying. But for that leader out there today who is sitting there saying, well, the world just threw a lot at me, but I need time to actually think forward. I've asked CEOs here recently that have been on the podcast from credit unions, how are they finding that space to actually think a year out, 2 years out, 3 years out, instead of just tomorrow, and it may all change, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you. Space is so crucial to me. And I'm highly introverted, highly sensitive. I like to think of myself as an ideapreneur. I need vast amounts of space. So in some ways, I asked on my show what people were secretly relieved they didn't have to do or say no to
That's a fun
last year.
question.
Yes. And for me, it was all these social obligations on the calendar. I was actually so happy to be a hermit and not even get invited anywhere.
I couldn't agree with you more on that, by the way. It surprises everybody who meets me at conferences and things that, like, I am a introvert who plays an extrovert at work.
Right.
And it was one of the things that surprised Jill when we first started dating was after an event, like in a social event, I need almost, if not double the time to come back, right? Like to recharge after it, where she's the exact opposite. She just like it energizes her and she's like, when's the next one? So
that is so funny. Me too. Whenever I have a speaking gig, back in the day before time when we would travel, I would spend an entire day charging, not speaking to anyone, just getting my energy reserves. And I would love being on stage. I would even love talking to people afterward. And then I needed to go back to my room and collapse. I had to have dinner by myself, not talk to anybody, go to bed early. And I have colleagues who they'll go to the VIP dinner the night before, they'll stick around for cocktail hour. And so we all have such different energy. I think as leaders, it's so important, as you said, to take the space, but also to realize there was this great article that came out in the summer of last year that said, your surge capacity is depleted. That's why you feel so exhausted. And I think that as optimistic as so many of us were that 2021 was here, hallelujah, we just get to turn at least a calendar page. But a lot of us came into this year very, very tired because there is the stress of the early days of the pandemic, the uncertainty, the fear for our friends and family if anyone were to get sick or ourselves. There was navigating the business landscapes and constant challenges there. Some people may have actually lost loved ones.
Absolutely.
And my heart goes out to you if that's the case. And so I think I've found in a lot of my professional dealings of just giving a lot of grace and space to each other right now, because everyone on my team is dealing with some pretty heavy stuff, and myself included. And it's like our capacity is so much lower, just emotionally, physically, all of that. And then these kind of wild side consequences and events keep unfolding. And
right.
At the very least, it does feel like we're all able to speak a little more openly with each other than pre-pandemic. I do feel people are willing to say like what's really going on in a way we might not have before. And as far as taking space, I mean, I think it's so important if somebody has the narrative to themselves, like, oh, I don't have time. It's really the opposite. You have to. Otherwise, you won't be doing any of your best thinking or most strategic thinking. So space is not just a luxury. It's a mandatory ingredient for our focus and leadership. And the higher up the chain you are, the more important space is, and not to be caught in the putting out fires every day.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more there. As you know, like in credit unions, it's not tough to find purpose, right? They help a lot of people. On your podcast, when I was listening, I got this feeling, even in the way that you ask questions to some of the leaders and the authors that you had on your show, that you seem like a very purpose-driven person yourself. And it really came out to me, like when you were these kind of questions that you would ask and dig into. What tools do you have to make sure that both individually and professionally, you're living that life that aligns with your compass, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the kind words about the podcast and the questions. There have been so many times, I think sometimes people have pressure on themselves to have some like beautifully crafted purpose statement. And for me early on, and I know that within the credit union community, you can probably relate, one of my statements was just be as helpful as possible to as many people as possible. So in your community, anyone who comes through the doors, if you can help somebody and you can get somebody set up for success, that's a win. Our purpose doesn't have to be so much more complicated than that. And even for me now, one of my mantras, you mentioned scarcity earlier. Well, for me, when I was leaving Google 10 years ago, I kept worrying, what if I fail at running my own business, And so I would just make myself ask, well, what if I earn twice as much in half the time?
Yeah.
And then later I added with joy and ease while serving the highest good. So, and I know this really aligns with credit union community as well, which is, I think if every day we take actions and make decisions and implement programs that are for the highest good for all involved, we're already almost all the way there. Like, what is in the highest good for you, the leader, for your team, for your community, for your members, for the community more broadly outside of, within the cities that you operate in? And if I can get quiet enough and listen to my intuition and make choices with integrity and generosity for the highest good, well, that's it. That's what I call heart-based business. It is just so not about obsessing over money and metrics the way that you hear about in a lot of the business press.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's for sure. It's interesting. One of the things that I worked on, and I probably should be ashamed to admit this, but last year was the idea of actually listening to understand and not to respond. So that idea, it's something that I've talked quite a bit about in the past year is we all, if we're listening, you can, a lot of the times you can figure out what the real issues, concerns, whatever it happens to be, feelings are. So, and at least it makes you a happier person, I think, too. So, but anyways, I was excited to ask you this. Recently, you had an episode on the Free Time podcast with, was it the CEO from Dr. Bonner?
Oh, yeah.
So this idea of, the idea of what a good leader is, I think has changed over time, but I think we all view that kind of a little bit differently too. And when I was listening to that episode, I kind of was getting excited to ask you this question. When you think of someone who's leading well, and maybe it goes into what you were just saying, right before this, that person who is leading, let's say, business with heart, doing the greater good, is there somebody that comes to mind? And is there, what traits do they have that makes them a successful leader today?
When you ask me that, the first person who comes to mind is a fellow author and podcaster, longtime friend-tor of mine, mentor, someone I look to. His name's Seth Godin. Maybe he's on your radar. A lot of people in the business world know him. He's written 19 best-selling books.
Quite a few books.
Seth, what they might not know is that Seth, when we could work in the office, so this is pre-pandemic, but makes lunch for his team every day. He makes lunch. No kidding. Yes. So talk about, I don't know if he himself would use the term servant leader, and there's been literature about servant leadership, or Simon Sinek wrote, leaders eat last, even if you just look at the title. But it's just that act of service every day. And by the way, that includes visitors. So when I would go co-work at the office, there I was. And there's Seth kind of making everybody lunch, and he's really good at it. And it's healthy, and it's vegan, and it's nutritious. And it's wow. I mean, it's just made with love,
Absolutely.
and he's the head of the whole show. And it's that's just the kind of person that he is. There's the term mensch, someone who's just just such a good, generous, wise person. And those are the leaders that I admire the most. And they're often the quietest about things like that. I don't think Seth really says or waves some flag saying, this is who I am and how I am. But it's present in every fiber of his being.
Just the random question now off that, what type of lunch does he prepare for the office?
Oh my gosh, I'll never forget. I had a grilled cheese sandwich that was double baked in the oven. Oh, it was so awesome. Good. He's made yummy vegan nachos, I think. I mean, Seth, don't kill me if I get these wrong. But the grilled cheese I can't forget because I've never been able to recreate it. It was on thick sliced sourdough.
That is absolutely fantastic. That just made my day hearing about that. So,
I'm I've never made lunch for my team. Also, I'm not very good in the kitchen. Let's start there. My husband's Lebanese. He's the real chef of the family.
Well, that sounds, delicious. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to just kind of move in a different direction right now because it's something that I've been thinking a lot about, and my guess is I'm not alone on this, but I found myself last year getting away from things that were really healthy for me. So for me in particular, it was journaling every morning and meditating. And all of a sudden, for a few months towards the end of last year, I wasn't doing it when it was probably the time that I needed to be doing it most. But it took me, I looked back, I was reflective, and I'm like, why did I get away from it? And I realized because every day when I was journaling, it felt like Groundhog's Day to me. And I was basically saying the same things, trying to make myself believe the same things. And, but it was that same stuff day after day. So earlier this year, I made that commitment again, and I can feel it, right? Like it's just, I know I'm healthier mentally because of this. So this morning, I was actually journaling on something that I have been for years. And I was like, after listening to your podcast and reading yours, I'm like, I'd like to throw this out there to you. And it's a huge question, so I hope you don't mind me asking this. But probably it's almost been 4 or 5 years now. Somebody asked me what made me feel alive. And when Jill and I first started talking in our conversation, she had posed the question, what lights you up? And I love it because you could just go, you can dive into those, values that we have in ourselves. So you, Jenny, my new friend, what makes you feel alive? What is it that lights you up?
Well, these days it's watching my dog Ryder. He's a 1.5-year-old German Shepherd.
Oh boy.
And I just have to watch him in the morning, taking him out in the morning or the afternoon. And he's so happy. Like, I think I know it's cliche because dog is man's best friend or woman, person's best friend. But he is so present. It's really true. I love animals. Dogs are angels in fur coats. And it lights me up to see him happy, to see him enjoying nature, and to see him just his beautiful, happy, present self. And it kind of just snaps me out. And I think pets spark so much joy. Like, I've lived in New York City for 10 years, and it's only been 1.5 years since we've had Ryder. But I can say that while it has added a lot of complications having a dog in the city, I just have to look at him and he's doing something silly or he's being affectionate, and it just shifts my whole mood and my whole energy. So,
puppies.
Yeah. He's great. And as for the
person too, so
as for the routines, like sometimes I think there's a lot out there, especially these days, of meditate, journal, gratitude lists, all the things, exercise, and it can start to add up and feel like a parent is just telling you, finish your vegetables. And the vegetables are good for you. So 2 things. One, sometimes I'm a fan of throwing it all out the window and just actually being free from the laundry list of obligations that include those practices that we know are actually good for us. On the other hand, I'm like you, Randy. I don't know if you relate, but I tend to do really well in streaks. Yes. I'm kind of all or nothing. Absolutely. If I break my streak, forget about it. It takes me so much, I get inertia. I'm just stuck in place. And then again, when I get on a streak, whether it's working out or 10 minutes of yoga a day or meditation or journaling, as long as I don't break my streak, I'm good. So I think it's also knowing your own personality quirks. Sometimes when I'm really off the wagon, but I know some of those things would be good for me, I tell myself something is better than nothing. So what I'm not allowed to do is say, I don't have an hour to work out. That's not acceptable. Therefore, I won't. I'm going to say, move for 10 minutes, and that's enough. And usually I'll want to do more.
If our listeners here could see me, I was laughing the entire time because I am a streak person, and it blows my mind how if I break that streak for one day, it may be months before I come back. Yes. So, if I'm 60 days in, I'm going to hit 61. But if I miss 62, I am done for. So
I did 1,000-day meditation streak.
Wow.
Unbroken. I tracked it in an app.
Yeah.
And when that streak broke, Randy, it's like I didn't meditate for 2 years.
I can completely understand that. Jill has just passed her 1-year meditation streak, and it's funny because I got back into it beginning of this year, and I was like, "Is this my longest ever? 100 days in?" And I'm like, "Nope." One other time I went 140 days, and I probably took a year off after that. So it's I feel that. That's impressive, an entire year. I'm blown away. I have not done that. So I had another one of these scratch my own itch questions, and when I think a mutual friend of ours, Antonio, I saw he was on your podcast as well. as a fellow podcaster, what brings you joy about, doing now both your shows? And we will link to both of them. I mean, everybody should subscribe to Jenny's podcast out there. So
thank you. And shout out to Tony, because that's how we are connected, is through Antonio. So thank you.
Absolutely.
He is such a gem. I love him. And let's link to his episodes too.
Absolutely.
Podcasting is funny because it is truly a labor of love. And I think nobody, as a listener, if you don't have your own show, you definitely don't just want to hear podcasters complain about how much work it is for so little pay, et cetera, et cetera. However, every episode is a project in and of itself. It's like one episode has so many moving parts, from planning, scheduling, inviting them, preparing, having the conversation, editing, show notes, releasing it. It's mind-blowing. And for so many shows, I think 97% are not monetized to the point where it could actually provide a full-time living.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And yet, it is something I would do, I swear, if I had no listeners at all. I have connected with so many of my heroes. And I don't know about you, Randy, but I feel like, books have been my best friends my whole life. I love books. I'm a bookworm. I'm a book hoarder. They're everywhere, floor to ceiling in my home. For me to read a book and then get to actually have a conversation with the author one-on-one and know that it can be for the benefit of anyone else who wants to listen is the most exciting thing in the world. It's like my book springs to life. I get to learn and ask questions. And then in some cases, I've become very good friends with the people I've had on my show. So I find that it's also a really good tool for introverts, because I would never, ever reach out to these people to say, hey, do you want to have coffee? Or like my least favorite, can I pick your brain? But if I invite them to my podcast and we can connect on a deep, intellectual, kind of intimate conversation, that's it. And then everybody wins. The listeners, hopefully they get some more exposure. I feel really fulfilled. And so it is one of these things that you asked what I get out of it. And I had a friend tell me, listen, the podcast landscape is getting crowded. You should really think hard before launching your next show, because what am I doing with 2 now? And he's like, launch a podcast if it's simply is the thing you can't not do. And that's it. Like, it doesn't matter how illogical or how much work compared to other things in my business. It's kind of the thing I can't not do. It's a double negative, but
I've wondered that since starting this. It's season 3 now, but I'm like it is probably the perfect tool for introverts. So we don't have to go anywhere, and we can have amazing conversations, and we know how long they're going to be. Basically,
you don't even have to talk about yourself. You get to connect around big ideas. You don't have to travel.
I appreciate you coming on the podcast, because often if I'm asked to be on, I say no, because I like asking the questions more. So it's kind of crazy.
So funny.
That's the introversion thing, though. But I absolutely love that. And let me ask you this: you've talked about like the connections that you have with people like Seth and then Antonio. Is that something where, is it, you do the keynote speaking, you're also the podcaster and a writer. Are these like communities that you're just a part of? They're all people that I highly respect. So I guess, how did the connections come about? Is it just over time? Or?
Well, I think time is one of my better friends in this arena, because I just so rarely proactively reach out to anyone. I think even my close friends would say, I'm just not a networker. I don't have a CRM tool. I don't set reminders of when to follow up with just so many people. And here's what I like. I'll just go back to podcasting for a second. I will also say I love listening. And so obviously, if you're still here in the middle of our show, in the middle of our conversation,
absolutely,
as listeners, you must enjoy this kind of thing too. I'm listening in the morning, I'm while walking, while doing all kinds of things. I even have podcasts put me to sleep sometimes. And so what I appreciate is that there's really nowhere to hide in podcasting. If you're kind of like a horrible person, it's going to come through your voice. Each of our voices are this unique fingerprint. There's a new book that just came out called This Is the Voice, on what a miraculous tool it really is, and how our voice contains our soul the same way that they say that eyes are the window to the soul. So in this case, Randy, look, we've never met, but you could listen to my show and get to know me a little bit. And then I can listen to yours and get to know you. And Tony's, who we mentioned, and Seth has a podcast called Akimbo. What I find is that I call it ongoing public original thinking. And this is a long way of answering your question about people, which I won't even call networking. But I find that when I have the courage to hit publish on things that aren't perfect, and I did a family newsletter when I was 10. I started a blog website in 2005 where I posted twice a week for 10 years. Now I've had the podcast combined for over 6 years. If I'm putting things out that I always feel awkward and imperfect about, always, there's never an episode where I don't go, oh God, oh, I'm cringing at myself, but I hit publish anyway. Then serendipity can do its thing. And I call it serendipity popcorn. You know, writing a book is like putting serendipity popcorn out into the world. You never know when it's going to pop and who's going to reach out. And that's really exciting to me. So I actually harness a lot of my energy goes into my ideas and putting public original thinking out so that I can be in a more receptive receiver mode. So that if someone listens and they contact me, in 10 years of running a business, I've done 0 outbound sales because I don't operate that way. I cannot imagine picking up the phone and calling one of you running a credit union and saying like, hey, or even you, Randy, hey, can I come speak to your at MiniCon? I would never, you find me crawled under the bed if that's what you told me to do. But if I put out ideas and then someone connects or you can see, oh, I wrote a book called Pivot. That's a good theme for this year's conference. Then I feel much more confident in myself. And so that is a very long way of saying the people that I've been mentioning, I've just gotten to know in this way over the last 10 to 15 years. And we do run in similar circles of just putting books out, you know, or like the author community or trying to be helpful to each other. And
absolutely.
And I'm not even very good at keeping in touch, but I do my best. And as long as people can give me some leeway on that, we're okay. As long as no one takes it personally.
I appreciate that. Gosh, yeah. You said a lot of good stuff there that I'm also trying to be respectful of your time here. So, but,
no worries. It's so fun chatting with you.
I sent you a message before that we hit record, that what you just said about getting to know somebody through the work they put out in the world. Like, I was like, ooh, I think I have a kindred spirit here. So,
it made my day.
Yeah,
it makes my day to hear that. And it's so cool. We have these shortcuts about each other. Yep. And like anyone listening to this, maybe you feel like you know us a little bit. And I have that same feeling toward people I listen to where they don't know we're friends yet. Like in my head, I have all these BFFs,
absolutely,
these podcast hosts, and I may never meet them in person, but I learn from them all the time. I'm grateful all the time to them. You know, I love it. It's called parasocial relationships, and I'm all for it.
Yeah, exactly. I feel the same way with the podcast that I listen to. But it was surprising to me after the first season of the podcast in credit unions, we have a big conference every year. That's this CUNA GAC. And walking around after a year of the podcast, the people that came up to me and would say things, and I'm like, how do you know that? We've never met before. Oh, the podcast, right? Because just from like having conversations and sharing parts about myself, I'm like, wow, I didn't realize how it can make you feel a little vulnerable right there. So there are people, it's good that people listen.
What do you remember about me? Yeah. Well, I started to have more people, if I would go to a conference, most places, nobody knows anything about me, that's fine. But it started to be that, every now and then some people would say, oh, I've read your book, but now so much more. I've listened to your podcast. And sometimes I'll get hired for a speaking engagement. And I think, it could be for a big company, even like Microsoft. And it's not until the day of, and I'm getting ready to speak, and they go, we all listen to Jenny's podcast on our morning commute, and there I had no idea that I'm the one, that podcast had been part of landing actual business.
So it wouldn't be the CUInsight Experience podcast without some rapid fire questions at the end. And I actually mixed in a few new ones for you again, because I was all excited to talk to you.
Love a good rapid fire round.
You got it. So the questions are rapid. As Tim Ferriss would say, your answers don't have to be. So what do you do to unwind when you're not working, writing, podcasting, keynoting, teaching? What does that work-life integration look like for you?
Well, I'll go back to Ryder, gets me out of the house to play Frisbee. I would not be playing Frisbee for 2 hours a day if I didn't have a dog. So that's my
love
current
That's the
unwind
current
mode.
one.
Yeah.
I see you're a yoga teacher too. Is that correct also?
I got trained in 2010, but I don't currently teach.
Okay.
I do love to practice yoga. Yeah.
That's your thing. Do you remember that moment? You talked about, working at Google and moving to New York and going off on your own when you were like, this is what I want to do as my career. And maybe that point I think all of us as when we, start a small business have where we're like, holy smokes, I can make a living doing this. And what was your motivation overall, just to go out on your own?
I never really had that much confidence that I could make a living on my own, but I knew that I would regret if I didn't try. And part of that was that even though I loved my job title at Google and I loved my job on paper, I was spending a lot of my time in meetings and in email and creating strategy decks and so little time doing the kind of creative ideating that I love and the building. I'm a builder, not really a maintainer.
I'm
And
the
so
same. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just had this sense that at the time I was at Google, there were, it was from 6,000 to 33,000 employees. And I kind of looked and I thought, if I create programs here, I could reach 30,000 people. And I felt good knowing that Google was also serving the world. But I thought if I go out on my own, I could give my first book, Life After College, really give it a chance to reach many more people. And I took a 3-month sabbatical. I honestly planned to go back to Google, but I became so busy within a week working on my own stuff that I just, like I said, I knew I would regret if I didn't at least try. So I say in Pivot that if you're a high net growth individual, you don't have FOMO, you have FONT, fear of not trying.
Right. Yeah. I hear you there. Was there a point in time, you mentioned being so busy just within, the first week when you were promoting the book, but was there a point where you're like, oh, wow, I'm not going back to Google and I'm probably not working for anybody else again? That type
Yeah.
of thing?
Well, I think I just realized that I couldn't do both. I mean, it's a very high pressure environment at Google and very intense. And I knew it wouldn't be fair to try to launch my book and continue on that path while trying to show up for my team and for Google and do the best job there. So it really kind of became a matter of burnout. I was just hitting burnout too many times. I couldn't juggle both. People often asked me, especially in the early years, do you regret leaving Google or have you ever regretted it? And I love Google. I still work with them to this day. But the answer was no. I'm a lone ranger. I love being self-employed. And even when I'm at my lowest points in my business and I don't know how I'm going to pay any of my bills, I still don't regret leaving the corporate environment just because I think I am better suited to this more lean, agile, free time mindset of building a team that and a business that really supports each of our health and well-being and, best energy activities.
I love it. Is there something that you said no to that you're sure glad you did? That kind of life-changing no. How about that?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm a lifelong people pleaser as well. So saying no is really hard for me. I can say that I had an aha moment on Thanksgiving of 2020. So, midway into the pandemic craziness. And I wrote down all my business streams of income on a piece of paper. And I also wrote down what I wanted to create in the year ahead. And I looked at it and I thought, this is insane. I'm running 10 businesses in parallel.
Oh, wow. Yep.
And I started to say no one by one to the ones that were working great for like even 5 years, but that weren't going to allow me to go all in on primarily my next book and podcast, which is where I think I'm most uniquely able to create. And so I think for me, saying no is more important now than ever, especially no to new projects or new activities that don't fall into really something that I and only I can do.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree with you more there. Another question, side question here. So when you talked about it, because this is something that I can say over the past few years of having the conversations with leaders from credit unions is sometimes that idea. So what you did on Thanksgiving, taking a kind of inventory of everything you were doing, it's tough to let the baby go, right? Like one of them.
It is.
That's I know my business partner and I started a second publication a few years back, and we should have shut it down after 2 years, but we kept just going, right? And for quite some time, and it probably took us about 5 to shut it down. We just didn't have the same passion for it, everything that we did with CUInsight. And is there anything, in the beginning of the podcast, we talked about kind of shaking up the snow globe. I loved your analogy, obviously. But for those people who are looking at the snow globe right now and seeing what falls, when you decided to cut some things out that, like you said, were successful enough, but they didn't give you the space to do some of the stuff that you really wanted to do. Use the word hacks again.
Yeah, well, I love this idea that you have to say no to the good. John Maxwell, you have to say no to the good so you can say yes to the best.
Yeah.
I have adapted that slightly. You say no to the good so you can say yes to what's next. And I think that the good is kind of a trap. And in order to pivot, pivoting inherently involves saying no to something that was working at some point. And to switch metaphors, so beyond the snow globe, I think any area of your life or work where there feels like a lot of friction, it's like, oh, it's time to put out that newsletter again, or where you're not getting traction. So I'm really interested from a systems thinking perspective. Where's there friction and things just are not flowing and I'm procrastinating and I'm holding things up? Where are you bottlenecking things? And then conversely, where are you getting real traction? And in my case, I actually had to shut down a membership community for heart-based business owners that saved me during the pandemic. When all the corporate work vanished in the same month, what kept me afloat was this community of about 100 people running their own heart-based business. However, the Thanksgiving Insight meant because I wanted to double down on serving that group with a new book and podcast, it meant that it didn't make sense for me to keep my best ideas behind a paywall just to these 100 members, and that all the energy I had been harnessing towards serving that group and thinking about what software we should use and what workshops to deliver meant that I wasn't putting that out more publicly, like to circle back to our public original thinking concept. And so shutting that group down was really hard. It felt like breaking up with 100 people, and like, how dare I shut this down? It was a big source of income and it was a group of people that I love. And of course I have other, I have I call it BFF, like for free time, the BFF community are people who support the podcasts. And that's how we're going to keep in touch. So it will be still an ongoing touch point. It will just be less intense than the community that we had.
Yeah.
But I also felt a great sense of relief in that I just had fewer things to juggle. And I think that focus is so crucial, and it's not easy. And you said it, Randy, our heart is in it. If you start something that you love and that was really working at one time, or there are good aspects about it, it's really hard to see clearly. But I also think that at some point, indecision is a decision. That your indecision about something is indicative that it's certainly not sparking joy. Because for as much time as you're debating, there's a mantra when editing a book: when in doubt, go without. Well, I think we could apply that to our lives in business. What if we gave ourselves this framework? When in doubt, go without. Or again, Marie Kondo, does this spark joy?
Right.
And if you're not leaping that, yes, this sparks joy. I can't wait to come record this conversation with Randy. Well, then it's got to go. It's hard to say that, but especially in these times, we don't have extra capacity or energy right now for all the fluff.
That's good.
But Momo's not fluff. The community I mentioned was not fluff.
Right.
It was just, I don't have the energy to maintain the workload that I could have even pre-pandemic.
And that's one of those things, if you can't do it well because you don't have the energy, or then it really isn't fair to what you're trying to deliver as well, right? So, I agree. Another rapid question here was there a COVID purchase that you made that you didn't know you needed, but now you're like, I can't live without? I know you got your pup before COVID, but
I got and what crazy timing, like to navigate a puppy and a pandemic in New York City was just like, oh my God. So yeah, we got him in December and then the pandemic hit in March, and it was a doozy. Training a puppy and adapting to that life in the city. I did pandemic purchase a Peloton.
Yeah,
April came around. I had this fever dream. I woke up and I'm like, I'm not even a spin person. You mentioned yoga. I was never one of those super intense people that was like going to spin classes. But I realized I was not getting good cardio at all. And I'm like, you know what? I like investing in my health and fitness. And I do love the bike. And I love the way they've set up the classes in the community. And I do yoga and meditation through Peloton now. And I go for streaks. And it was actually one of the best pandemic purchases I could have made.
That's fantastic.
I'm an avid fan, and I bought some Peloton stock once I realized how well they were nailing the technology and the community, how sticky it was for me personally. I bought some stock. So now my goal is to earn back the cost of the bike through my stock earnings.
There you go. It's a free bike at that point, right?
Exactly.
So, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I absolutely love that.
I'm halfway there. Yeah.
I was going to say, if you're a fan, there's probably others, right?
Oh, it's just rare to it's rare to experience such seamless integration of technology, community, and quality content. I really admire watching how they're building their business.
Absolutely. So what were you like in high school? And did you get into any memorable trouble that you'd be willing to share with our listeners?
Trouble? Who are you talking to? Honestly, the look of like disappointment on a teacher or my mom's face was such a deterrent to me. It made me feel so sick to my stomach that I couldn't bear to get in too much trouble more than once. I did sneak out in middle school, and now I feel so horrible because my poor mom. My God, how do parents deal with the kids?
These kids,
who knows? Sneaking out in the middle of the night. So I feel really sorry, Mom. It's not that she listens to any podcast, but
right, yeah. Well, my mom listens. She'll be like, "See, you shouldn't." She sends me a text after
she does.
The Monday
That's
after
so nice.
release. Yep. And she'll say stuff like, "I may get a text. Hi, Mom." She's because I'm sure she'll listen.
Hi,
she'll
Randy's
be like,
mom.
"That Jenny sounds nice." Like that type of stuff. So,
well, your mom did a great job raising you. So
well,
happy she's listening.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I didn't send this over to you because I was just looking at it before we got on, but I have to ask. I read in your bio, and as you've said, you're based in New York City, where you imagine yourself starring in a movie whenever you're walking through crowded streets. So my question, what's the name of your movie?
Oh my God. Oh, goodness. You know, it's funny. Yeah, I picture I'm in a movie montage. Less that the movie's about me,
right.
But if I have headphones, I don't really listen to music anymore because I try to be aware of my surroundings. But there were days when I used to just pop in headphones and I would walk to yoga and I would just be looking out at a sea of people. And just the diversity of who you're seeing, what are they wearing, who's making eye contact. I met my husband walking opposite directions down a city street. And he just said, "Nice overalls." I turned around and said, "Thank you." We circled back and tried to tell him where to find them. And he was looking for overalls that day, and he forgot to tell the universe that he wasn't looking for a wife. Because he was adamant about not having a girlfriend at that time in his life.
That's hilarious. And for some reason, it makes me think of Best in Show, the movie where they're at opposite Starbucks. So
yeah. So it's like that was an actual meet cute and serendipity at play. And so maybe the movie I would retroactively name it like Meeting on Mott Street or something.
Awesome. I love it. Well, thanks for telling the story. So after people have finished reading your books, there's Pivot. And there's Life After College, and it sounds like you're working on another one, so that's really exciting. You said you're a lifelong reader. Is there a book that you just think everyone should read?
This book is quirky and whimsical, but that's why I love it. It's called Outrageous Openness, Letting the Divine Take the Lead. And I think if you feel weighed down by life or you feel the tendency to take things too seriously, this can be a really delightful read and a reminder of all of the unseen magic. I just love it. Outrageous Openness. I read it 5 years ago and it has stuck with me ever since.
You've added a couple books to my list here today already. So the random question, what's the greatest album of all time or Spotify playlist that you listen to over and over? I'll
give you both. Spotify playlist that I love is called Deep Focus. Okay. And they also have Deep Focus 2.0. Those are good for just getting into some deep work. And, I think I'm going to say Pearl Jam's 10. It's one of my all-time favorite albums.
Yes, indeed. You're up on that. That's for sure.
Yeah. Alive, Jeremy. I mean, Eddie Vedder. Eddie Vedder well, before I had a husband, he was my husband, and he just didn't know.
He just didn't know yet.
He just didn't know. He just hadn't, actually met me. But
Right.
his voice, he has so much passion. So I love Pearl Jam. Even though
He is into
a throwback.
Day, he's still a cool guy. That's for sure. A cool rock star. So there's a question I normally don't send out in advance, and I was looking forward to asking you this. But when you hear the word success, who is the first person that comes to mind?
So here's a twist, because I actually tried to remove the word success from all of Pivot, the whole book. It's a word that I think along with the word career, it's kind of like going in the rearview mirror for me.
Yeah, I see where you're going.
Because
here.
I think success is so personal. And
it's the reason I like the question.
Yeah.
Right? Is because I believe we all define it differently. People on this podcast have heard me say there was a guy named Ted in Roatan who was categorizing sea turtles, not for anyone but himself. I'm like, he was successful and happy. Right?
Yes.
So,
yes. Yeah. Okay. I love that example.
I love that you removed that from the
my vocab.
That's
the
cool.
word success is it's almost like happiness to me, kind of this ephemeral, hungry ghost, whereas like, are we ever successful enough or happy enough? Whereas equanimity is the sense that for me of being present and grounded and okay within the eye of the storm that is my life.
Oh, gosh, I like that. Holy smokes. I'm like
I still cheated though, because I didn't give you a person of success.
Do you know what?
Okay,
I normally will sit and pause or wait or kind of push a little harder, but with you, I am not going to, because I absolutely love your answer. And you actually just had me thinking where I'm like, okay, wait, I have to finish the podcast.
I will say, I admire Oprah, who I mentioned earlier, and Tim Ferriss, not because they have a lot of money.
Right.
I love that. I think they're pioneers. I think Oprah is just like an interview whisperer.
Absolutely.
I just love
oh my gosh.
the deep topics that she discusses with her guests, the fact that she's had such longevity. Tim Ferriss, I love because his books changed my life. Like every newsletter he sends, I use the toothpaste Tim recommends. I use so many products that he suggests, or little tips, tricks, hacks. He wrote 4-Hour Workweek.
Absolutely.
That really sparked so much. Yeah, completely life-changing. So he is somebody that I respect. Let's say that. I mean, success, yes, he's had smashing success. But he wrote an article on 11 reasons not to be famous.
Absolutely.
About all the downsides that we probably don't think about. So I appreciate his honesty and also his level of traction, to go back to that phrase. I think he's gotten a lot of traction with his ideas because he adds so much insane value to people's lives.
Absolutely. Oh, I couldn't agree more. The microphone I'm using was the one he recommended.
Exactly.
I have the little portable recorder. That's I'll do the intro on afterwards. Is from that. So yeah, no.
Yeah.
I have always said about the 4-Hour Work Week, like some of it's very dated, and if people are looking to read it now, and there's nothing about it that's working 4 hours, right? But it changed the way that I looked at the word that you didn't like, also career, and like what I was working for. And in living, I mean, I feel like I live more present because of some of the stuff that I picked up out of that book years ago. But
he also redefines another word I think needs to go by the wayside, which is retirement. So
absolutely.
He talks about taking early retirements and not waiting our whole lives to travel and untether ourselves from wherever our location. And of course, like you said, this idea of becoming a lifestyle entrepreneur, a digital nomad did become somewhat derided as a terminology. However, so many people I know who are retirement age, like my parents, have no plans of stopping work. They love what they do. My dad's a total Renaissance man, painter, architect, reader, writer. My mom is still working at Stanford, and she could have retired, and she just doesn't want to.
She loves what you do.
So I think he really reframed that notion of just working for a future payoff that we may or may not experience, and how do we build that into our lives now and our work now?
Oh, absolutely. That was fun. See, you did a great job with that question.
Good. Glad you let me wind my way there.
Right. Oh, that's the perfect way to wrap up the show. Thank you again, Jenny, for being on today. This was an absolute blast. The last question that I have for you is, do you have final thoughts or any asks of our listeners today?
Oh my goodness. Well, if you made it this far, you're in what my friend Neil Pasricha calls the end of the podcast club.
Yeah.
So you get a gold star from me. Thank you for listening. And if it's early enough when you hear it, come to our mini con event. Can't wait.
That's right.
And if you want, I created a mini course around some of this stuff. So you can just go to itsfreetime.com to check out all that. And thank you so much, Randy, for having me here. And to Randy's mom, if you're still here listening. Because if you weren't Randy's mom, we wouldn't even have a podcast to be on today.
That is right. Thank you, my friend. And I can't wait to talk to you again on the panel at MiniCon and hear your keynote. It's going to be absolutely amazing. I know you're going to bring great stuff. So be well.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
Thanks, Randy. You too. Bye, everyone.
Before we go, I just want to say a heartfelt thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in today. I just greatly appreciate it and appreciate by you listening, I get to keep having these fun conversations. And once again, a big thank you to Jenny for taking the time and to share her experiences with all of us. It was absolutely amazing. And a big thank you to our sponsor, PSCU. Our friends at PSCU have been a longtime partner and supporters of ours, so please make sure to click on their links when you're over there in the show notes as well. Give them some love, see everything they have going on to help the credit union community. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast players, Apple, Google, Amazon, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, whatever it happens to be. We're there. And thank you all again for listening. Have a great day and be well, friends.